anyways, just for prosperity, I'm Renee Remick, and I'm one of the consultants here at Propeller, specializing in data analytics, and I'll be moderating our panel today on data-driven culture. I would love if our panelists could introduce themselves in this order, and I'll hand it over firstly, spoiler alert, to my very own boss, Andy. But Andy, if everyone could introduce yourselves with your name, your location, your title, and where you work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Renee. Andy Tanner, I'm Propeller's Data Analytics Practice Director, based out of Denver, but cover really clients across the US and across the globe.
Awesome, thank you.
I'm Kaja Maycoats, and I am the Vice President of Clinical Training and Development for Centria Healthcare. And I live in California, but we're a national organization.
So thank you so much, Kaja.
Awesome. My name is Shayla Nosal. I am the People Strategy and Change Management Practice Director at Propeller, and similar to Andy, based in Bay Area actually, but cover clients all across the US.
Awesome. Thank you, Shayla. And last but definitely not least, Mike.
Hey, everyone. I'm Mike Costa, and Senior Product Manager of Data Products at Procore Technologies, where it is our mission to connect everyone in construction. Nice to meet everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. We are making great time. So just as a refresher, this is specifically a panel where we're going to be discussing building data-driven culture. How do you empower people across your organizations to be more data-driven? So again, thank you everyone for joining us here today, but I want to have plenty of time for a robust discussion. So if you have any questions or if you'd like to hear more as one of our panelists touch on something, we don't have the chat enabled, but we do have our question and answer, and we will have time at the end today to submit your questions. So please feel free just to, at any point, put that in the Q&A section, and we'd love to get to that at the end. But to get us started, Andy, I would love for you to help kind of just ground us in what we're doing here. So Andy,
Sure.
if I said an organization had a data-driven culture, what would that mean to you?
Yeah, great question, Renee. So the way I kind of see it is a data-driven culture is one where all levels of the organization are using data in everything they do. So, people are comfortable and capable in using data, and it's integrated seamlessly into operations at a tactical level, and of course, strategic decision making as well. Historically, what I've seen is analytics was both kind of viewed as more of a tech solution when it first, organizations started using data and analytics, and it was really a supplemental or a bolt-on versus being fully integrated, and it wasn't really viewed as a business solution. In order for a data-driven culture to really take form, it has to be not only built into everyday operations, but also it needs to be across the business. And so once big data emerged, most organizations kind of had an intentional effort on getting that integration that I speak of. But it started with really integration from a tech perspective. So, putting in some of the tools and the platforms, building capabilities within data scientists and data architects and engineers, but still not much of a focus on the people and culture side. And as a result, it wasn't getting adopted. Organizations, the business resources within organizations weren't really engaging with it to the level that organizations anticipated, and they were seeing a pretty low return on investment. And a lot of organizations abandoned kind of using data for at least some period of time, because again, they weren't seeing that return, that value that they were expecting when big data came. But in the last 5 years, I've really seen a shift where organizations are really engaging more with the business. They're kind of viewing it now as table stakes, that in order to be competitive and be leaderships in their industry or leaders in their industries, they really need to expand and focus not only on kind of the tech part of the equation, but on the business and the people side as well. And coupling that with the other thing I've been seeing is more coupling that focus and that emphasis with change management, because oftentimes they're recognizing that this is, this is not a 6-month journey. This is a multi-year initiative and program, and again, to really upskill people, get them engaged, and get them using data as part of day-to-day operations, it requires, you know, a really strong change management strategy.
Yeah, it's almost like you can't just buy something or have a new piece of tech and then expect to get any payoffs from it if no one
Right.
uses it or knows how to use it or knows why they should even use it under what circumstances. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a great like table setting. Does anyone have anything else they'd love to contribute or that they want to highlight off of that? Awesome. Well then, Mike, I should say, something that I didn't hear Andy talk about was something that I'm starting to hear a little bit more frequently in like the data culture space. And that's the idea of democratizing access to data. What is that? Could you please tell me anything more about that, Mike? Because it's something that I think is kind of new.
Definitely. That's a great question. And, you know, I love taking apart these buzzwords and turning them into like actionable things that you can actually do to democratize your access to data. And, you know, really it's about making data accessible to everyone at all levels of the organization for decision making. So very similar to what Andy was talking about, but there are some caveats to it. I think the biggest key is it comes along with lowering the technical barrier to entry to working with data. You know, we've had some self-service data tools for years now, business objects, Tableau, and they're great. You grab a measure, grab a dimension, and you have a chart. But, you know, I'm sure, Renee, you're familiar with this, like the quality of that data behind the scenes in many organizations is questionable. And as like a data analyst, you know, okay, I need to remove duplicates. I need to do a min-max on this field. I need to manipulate the data so it's in a clean state. And that's the barrier to entry for somebody that's like a customer success person who's just going in and wants to see the reports. So it's key to giving users that data in a way that it's already been cleaned, you know it's quality data, and it's kind of like a master set of data. And the way that we're doing that is by cleaning the data upstream in the data pipelines for the users. So what they access in the platform has already been validated by a data engineer, a business analyst, and it is ready for them to review and make decisions. The other piece that this focuses on is giving users the data that they need to make decisions. And what I mean by that is, I'll use a salesperson, for example. They log into a platform and they want to look at like what accounts are renewing in the next quarter. They don't want to go in and filter down to their accounts. They want to log in and have their accounts just presented to them. So creating this curated data experience for users that they know that what I'm getting when I log in is the information that I need and I can play around with it. And what we're calling that is like creating accidental data scientists. We're giving them the tools to manipulate data, to research data, but it's within the safety of us validating that the information is correct, accurate, and usable for them.
Okay, so if I was to like paraphrase that back, essentially like democratization of data is about making sure that there's good high quality data that is easily accessible to the people who could use that to then make informed decisions, and then letting them use their like, what it makes me think of is then having the subject matter experts, right? Like your salesperson who's really great about knowing about sales, but maybe doesn't know about, you know, sampling with replacements and like a complicated math equation, right? But like they know what their sales, so then giving them access to all that information so they can then use their own intuition to like make informed decisions. Am I paraphrasing? Okay.
Definitely.
Okay, cool. I feel like that's something that I hear Andy kind of talk about with like learning pathways, which we'll hit on later, but yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, sorry, Shay.
Oh, we'll go Andy, then Shayla.
I was just going to add a +1 to that, Mike, specifically on that data quality piece. And again, kind of back to that question, Renee, you asked about how do you create a data-driven culture. Is historically there, you know, oftentimes was just this push to get that data out there. but not enough time spent on the governance of that data. And that's the quickest path to, lack of adoption and engagement in data, when somebody gets something and they can't trust it, right? So they're making decisions and they're seeing things, and then they later find out that data wasn't, to the quality level they needed, or completely inaccurate. And so, you saw a lot of abandonment because of that reason as well. So.
Excellent point.
That's a really good point. And I've seen a spread of data from, Salesforce, great source, updated pretty frequently. You might have a database that is reliable, and then you might be joining a data source that's a Google sheet on somebody's laptop somewhere, and it's only accessible certain hours a day and when they update it. And understanding where all those data sources are and taking those low-hanging ones like a Google sheet that just exists somewhere and eliminating that, putting it into a database and putting data governance around it is key to making this work.
That's awesome. Shaylin, what were you wanting to add in?
Yeah, I was just going to add, it's absolutely the data governance and absolutely making sure that the reports are clean and that everyone has access to them and we know when they're updated and where they're coming from. But it's also super important to take a step back and make sure that everybody understands how to use the tools and what kinds of decisions they can make with this new data source. For people who would absolutely shudder at the thought of being an accidental data scientist, myself included, I'm definitely not a numbers person, but I like seeing reports and seeing data. And so it's creating the accessibility to using the data.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like something that made me really excited when I first got into my master's degree program about data analytics was finding out that in some ways, Florence Nightingale was like the first data analyst, because she made a chart that was public facing to like inform people, and no one had used charts to try to inform the general populace before. And when I think about a data-driven culture, I think it's people being able to take in accurate information to then help inform a choice. We're not talking about slapping AI on something that will like just make a decision in a black box for you. We're talking about real people who are experts in their field being able to have access to real tangible data that will help them like make those critical decisions. Awesome. Thank you guys for getting us started here. I would love to pose this next question to Kaja. But when we're talking about like data and what data culture is, could you maybe tell me a little bit more about, like, in your opinion, what the importance of having that data culture is, or how do you even like foster that within an organization?
Yeah, I think, across the board, they're kind of to what Shaylin was talking about before. We might have a lot of situations where, depending upon your field, I know we have people that are attending this talk today and have a lot of different backgrounds across different industries and don't necessarily all have the data analytics background. As part of my field as a behavior analyst, we do a lot of data analysis, but it's very specific to the clients and to the work that we're doing with the population we serve. And so part of that and being a data-driven culture and how to kind of foster that is or the importance, I would say first, is supporting us with some objective decision making, right? It's really, I think we've all heard, if I think more generalist, like the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And so sometimes we might hear in a large organization or even a small organization, maybe somebody, like maybe it could be an opinion of something that's not going well, but it's one person that maybe might not be speaking for volume. So if we have the opportunity to sample data, whatever that might be, through team member surveys, or even through, like in our industry, for example, we might actually look at client data, global client data in progress, to see, is that accurate? Is that information accurate based upon the analysis we have? Or is it one person that we really need to coach and support and guide in maybe some user errors or things along those lines, instead of investing our time? For example, we have technology. We have our own internal technology we use at our organization. And we rolled out a change. I'm going to give a real world example here. We rolled out a change, and we had a couple people who were saying this one particular aspect of the software isn't working. And we could have taken our developers and said, developers, look into this. What is this big issue? But instead, we actually used all the data at hand to identify, actually, 99% of our users are accessing that aspect of the software effectively without issues. What's going on with this 1%? And it was user error. But had we not done that and used that decision at hand and made sure that we are driving a data-driven culture, we would have invested time from our developers in something where they could be spending their time elsewhere. Investment of money, time, resources, all of those things. And we do that across everything. And I think it's important when we look at it as across an organization. We're in a human services industry at our company. And so we do it when we work with our clients. We actually take data on our clients and their behaviors to help with supporting their independence in the future and modify programming. But we also have recruiting departments, and we have HR departments, and we have intake department and our IT department. And we don't all necessarily have a data-driven mindset, but if we as an organization have that at the forefront of everything we do, so every meeting that we have, even if it's a brainstorming meeting, we ask, like, what's the baseline data here? Where are we serving at this point and before we're going to make a decision to implement some type of change? How do we look at what is in front of us before we decide to modify anything within our organization or any changes to make sure that we're actually investing in the appropriate places? And it's, I don't know about y'all, but we're in 30,000 meetings a day, right?
Sure.
And so part of that is leading that in every single discussion, whether it's a brainstorming meeting or an actual decision-making meeting, is making sure that we use the data at hand to and coach those who maybe don't have that background experience, use the data at hand in order to guide those decisions.
Oh, I really like that. I'll say what that makes me think of is also making sure that you have all these little Brene Brown about like daring greatly or like being willing to fail. I think it's really great if you can have conversations around like, what information would you like to have? Like, you don't have to be limited to like what is available currently, but even if you're asking people like, what kind of information would help you make the decision, or when you're trying to look at these aspects, regardless if it's, you know, in mental health or in business or in sales, like what else would be helpful? And just having that mindset, I think, is what would help someone become an accidental data scientist. Mike, I love that term. I'm stealing it and using it like wildfire. 1,000%. Yeah, that's an awesome answer, Kasha. Does anyone else have anything they want to add into about like how do you foster that like data-driven culture within an organization?
You know, I think it's come up a couple of times now that the training of how to use tools that you give people, or the enablement program, like letting people know that it's something that's going to be supported, because I've worked at places where we get new tools all the time. There's this report, this new portal to go to, but knowing that there's a structure to this, there's a rollout plan, it's been communicated, there's help documentation for it, there's a support channel for it, providing all of that enablement around it is what helps get people on board.
Yeah.
Agreed. And making that individualized, like for particular roles, right? You're not, there might be a dashboard or a tool or resource that has a lot of data on it, but how do you give the tools and resources to people in their particular roles so they can make the decisions and access those data the way that they need to for their position?
Yep, and mention of training there, Mike, is a great one, and not only just providing the training, because again, historically, what I saw was a lot of training programs around the mechanics of using a tool, right? So how do you navigate through a Tableau dashboard? But what wasn't spent a lot of time on, or a lot of time wasn't spent on, is actually trying to change the behaviors. You know, especially with seasoned business professionals who have been doing this for years in a very different way. So really taking the time to think about a learning program that drives, you know, level 3 and level 4 of Kirkpatrick of driving business and behavior change and business impact, and making sure that you measure that, right? So a lot of times there's measurement around learning programs that's just, did people attend that training, and did they complete it, did they pass an exam, right? Which is very knowledge based. But to really get that adoption and that data driven culture, it's really changing mindsets and changing behaviors. And one of the ways that you know, organizations do this, or I've seen effectively, is making sure that there's also the measurement. So when they're back in the field and they're doing this, are they getting the improved results that were expected, and also identifying where there's potential additional growth opportunities for both individuals and the organization.
Just to yes and Andy, I think it also starts with making sure that we're setting goals that can be measured and tracked against. at the individual, at the project, at the team level, if we are setting targets for ourselves that are actually backed up by data in terms of, yes, we accomplished that, or no, we did not, then we all start to be thinking in more of this data-driven mindset.
Shaylin, you could not have given me a better segue. My next question is for you. As we're talking about, right, shifting this culture, I wanted to know, what do you, as like a professional change manager, like what do you see preceding that change in culture, and what are the best practices to help facilitate that?
Yeah, I'm going to go a little nerdy, but I feel like this
Please.
is a space, since this is most likely a webinar for fellow nerds. So I think about culture in a couple of different ways. And the first is that we experience culture in both the mindsets that we hold to be true and our behaviors. So it's mental and it's physical. And we also experience culture at multiple different levels, at the individual level, at the team level, at the way we work cross-functionally, and then across our entire organization. So there's a lot of different layers to the way that we experience this data-driven culture. And within that, there are different shifts that you can look towards lining up to make sure that they're aligned to this data-driven culture that you're trying to build. So the first is the organizational aspects, such as like the mission, the vision, our values. Are we truly demonstrating at the top line in our strategy that we believe that being data-driven will help us move into the future? The next is things like tactics. So those are like our organizational structures. Are our data scientists where they need to be? Do we have data analysts on the project teams that are relevant to us? Do we have the technology, the reporting capabilities to make sure that we can actually further this data-driven culture to move forward? And then those will trickle down into what I like to call a signal. So those are things like our attitudes and beliefs. So yes, I am a data-driven employee because I have the tools and the reports that enable me to achieve the goals that my leader has set out for me, so that I know at the end of this year, at the end of this initiative, at the end of this project, I have become a more data-driven employee.
Awesome. I feel like really what stands out to me is having like leadership ask themselves, like, is this part of our mission? And then making sure it gets communicated, because I'll have Mike maybe back me up here potentially, but I know in a prior organization, I was in like a role where we were having this huge system change, and all of a sudden as like a frontline employee, I was being asked to like check a lot more boxes after every like interaction I had to do. And there was a lot of pushback from other people on the team that were just like, I put this in my notes. Why do I need to also check these 3 boxes? And it was just that lack of change management, which I really saw as a big stumbling block to making that change happen much faster than it could be. And I apologize, I'm being oblique here, but it literally took like a failure of the system, and then finally having people come in to individual meetings and having someone say, I don't get the point of having me have to like check these 3 boxes. And then someone else explaining, we are pulling a report based off of this to try to figure out if we're giving you too many or too little work, or if we're like divvying up things and leads correctly. And we're trying to analyze that. So when we don't have that, we don't get any records. And that in particular person who's doing a lot of pushback worked with a really niche population. And so that population like wasn't getting represented in the data, and it was like a huge light bulb moment. But we were just, and I say we because Mike and I used to work at a similar place, or maybe the same place, but like there just like wasn't any change management happening along with this big push to change our data-driven culture. And having that level of conversation, I think, Shaylin, is really important.
Yeah, what you're speaking to, Renee, is sounding tops down and bottoms up. So what are we doing to make sure that our leaders are all aligned and trickling the message down to their teams and empowering and enabling their teams and giving their teams the information, the what's in it for me, the case for why this should be important. And then also that the employees are listening to their leaders, feel bought into why this is a good thing for them. And I always like to have a couple of plants, what I like to call change champions, who can be pulling the team around them to say like, yes, we're going to start to pull this report, or yes, it's important for us to click this box, you guys, and this is why. So when we're all at the water cooler complaining about those check boxes, somebody is our mole, our positive mole.
Yeah. I mean, truly, knowledge is power, and you want people to be able to talk to each other. Like, it's okay to have some like growing pains when change is happening, but as long as you then also feel like people are being heard and information from every place is getting highlighted. Anyways, you said it much better than I did. Mike, I saw you took yourself off mute. Was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm glad Shaylin brought up the what's in it for me, because I was going to use something you might be familiar with, Renee, the meeting users where they're at. And I think it's important that not just considering how is a data-driven culture going to help the organization, but how is it going to help individual users, and letting those users know that they're on board and the teams implementing this culture are considering them. An example I'll give you is like a salesperson. 99% of the time, they're on the road. If you give them a dashboard that they have to log into on a browser, on a computer, they're never going to use that dashboard. But if they can get a dashboard that's on their phone, on an app that they can show a customer or use on the plane, that's going to get them on board. And just building something like that will let them know that, you know, this wasn't just built for the company I'm working for, but it was built for me as a user. And I think it's really important to have that, have them be on board for the ride.
Yeah, you could have the most beautiful technology that's like has the most advanced algorithm, but if no one's actually talked to or understands the end user or the business user and what their workflow is, like, you're throwing money away, in my opinion. I think that's something that I really loved about Propeller and like getting to work under Shaylin is like seeing just the level of detail that people will get to, and like, let me watch your workflow. Like, let me watch you do your work for the day. Like, tell me where your pain points are. Because you can't just come in and say, we have change management. We emailed people 3 times and had 2 lunch and learns, and therefore everyone had a chance to understand. Like, that's not like that's not what it is. So yeah, that like end user, like that deep understanding of the end user is where technology and business have to be aligned.
I'm going to geek out here. I was a little bit of a behavior analyst. I know I'm a little outlier here, but and somebody who supports change management. A couple of things we're talking about here from a behavior scientist perspective is decreasing response effort. And so that is, oh, did I lose you? Okay, back. That is, you know, to Mike's point of making sure that when we are providing these data, we're doing it in a way that is the most accessible and easiest. But then when I, you know, was resonating on a lot of what Shaylin was saying is a lot of shifting to a data-driven culture is an aspect of change management. And in order to support people to modify their behaviors, they have to access some form of reinforcement, which is a way in which I want to continue to do this for some reason, right? And so there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. One is just by, you know, your direct manager, yes, reinforcing you and going over that and your decisions resulting in more income from your sales clients, right? But another way that's really fun that we actually did with when we worked with Propeller on a change management activity was we did gamification. And so we had some change that we implemented. We actually implemented some dashboards and supported those. And within our dashboards, people that were actually making the database decisions and changes and were implementing these things then also had ranking on this dashboard that resulted in, and we had, you know, we just had a general fun competition, but you actually can do that too, where there is an actual reward or award that's given or some form of like a, you know, team celebration and whatnot, and making it game out of that adoption too can be a supplementary way to not only have individuals access the data because it might be delayed, like before they like access the data a lot. It's a lot of work to learn something new and change is hard, but the more they do it, they'll become more fluent with it and it'll become easier. But you've got your competitive folks, that gamification and enough and that competition of just, I'm learning this, I'm doing this faster, in itself can support people with wanting to access those data. And then to Shaylin's point, becoming your change champions that are really advocating for that and the use of those data across your organization.
Yes, I also feel like that speaks to, or what that makes me think of is also having that gamification or having that tracking at different employee like experience levels. And I know that's something that Andy is like a big fan of, is talking about like teaching or monitoring to like where you, like, are you a brand new manager? Are you an expert manager? And like thinking like, what are those KPIs and how would those change appropriately? but I'm not going to get too far ahead of ourselves. I want to make sure we have time for all our questions here. But literally, we've been talking about what I wanted to hit up next, which was just like if people could share examples of how they've encouraged data-driven decision-making at all levels of the organization. So like Kaja, you're saying like you help there be transparency and like a fun accountability for those like power users. But does anyone else have any examples about like tangible examples of how you've helped encourage data-driven decisions at like any level of the organization?
Yeah, I'll jump in here and just kind of piggybacking on what Kaja said is not only the measurement and gamification, which is an amazing technique to really get people more involved in it just drives the behaviors that you want to see. But specifically on what you mentioned, Renee, on the different levels. One of the things that I found really important in driving that change was not only having leadership champion it and create the vision and discuss and communicate the benefits of it, but being side by side with all levels in actually doing this. And I'll tell you, gamification at the highest leadership levels is really one of the most effective ways to drive the actual change. It's certainly effective at all levels, but you really see the excitement and the engagement when you make something competitive like that. So I think that's an absolute great approach. The other piece that I found to be really effective is actually doing experiential learning, because like we touched on earlier, and Shay was talking about this as well, is to change mindsets and to change behaviors. You really need to get people immersed right into what it's like to actually engage with data and start feeling some of those benefits. So and with something like a learning simulation, you can do that in a very safe environment, which is one of the kind of the blockers that we've seen in actually getting people engaged is that fear of like, if I do it this way and it doesn't work, all of a sudden my outcomes are not going to be where I need them to be, or maybe my performance is evaluated differently. So using experiential learning in learning simulations is a really effective technique to actually drive that change. But also there's a lot of data points that you can start collecting and creating, personalized learning paths for an individual. Maybe they're really good at say, building a dashboard, but maybe don't have the acumen to really generate the insights and take action on those. So actually using data to measure and drive the change, specifically within learning programs, is another really effective technique that I've found.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll say we are about halfway through the webinar today, so I'll just encourage all of our audience members again, thank you so much for being here. But make sure you're thinking about any of the change initiatives or places where you feel like there are pain points within your organization where you wish there was a more robust data culture around, and get your questions in, because we've got a really great panel. So like we're happy to help you. So feel free to submit those questions, but I will go on to our next question, which Andy is for you to get us started off. But we're talking about, like, you literally teamed me up here. So again, thank you. It's almost like we work together, Andy. But when we're talking about building data literacy among employees, right? I think that it's crucial to have that data-driven culture coming from within and having some of those SMEs like become these accidental data scientists. So what kind of strategies or other initiatives have you seen that effectively like enhance those data skills? Or could you like tell us more about these like the behavioral learning that you're talking about here a little bit? If you could just expand.
Yeah, so I'll expand on that. So we did a program for a professional services organization, and one of their main disciplines was external audit. And I talked earlier about really, kind of the challenge of shifting mindsets, especially of seasoned business professionals. Auditors and changing their behaviors is really difficult because they've been trained a certain way, and there's obviously compliance and things that they need to do very by the book. So the program was designed to actually start integrating analytics, and there was huge benefits if the organization was able to do this, because what it's doing is replacing the manual procedures that are done with an audit, which are very time consuming and very costly. Starting to replace those with some automation. So this was a great example of where we were, kind of thinking about what was mentioned earlier is in the what's in it for me, and then building that experiential learning program in that, we built all levels of learning. So just learning the mechanics of it, but also showing that this is across the organization. So it's not just all those things that kind of create the fear of somebody that, like Shay mentioned, of being an accidental data scientist, and hesitating to want to engage in data because of that. Also showing that this is not just a one person or even a one team. This is being adopted across the organization, and you're going to have those experts that can support you. You're not going to have to go out and build a statistical data model. But as an auditor, one of the things you will need to do is really engage in that and understand, how do I use that data? How do I analyze it? And how do I take action on it? So that's really what this program was designed to do. And then the second thing, once we kind of built out the learning paths and actually, had that experiential learning or that blended learning, we also built measurement mechanisms that also then became tied to performance. So one thing that is a common pitfall is if you design learning measurement and you only do it for the purposes of learning, but actually don't take it into the actual field, then the behaviors are likely not going to be adopted that you want to see. So if you start measuring individuals on actually using of analytics, and then also the results of that, and individuals start seeing that and feeling that, then you're going to start seeing that change in mindset and that change in behavior versus kind of a forced change, that oftentimes that's where, I know Shay and Kaja can talk to this, is that if you just kind of force a change and tell people you have to do this, then you're not going to see that adoption, and you're not going to see that change that you're really looking for. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've seen you present, and I've had the privilege of seeing you present in a different setting, and you really broke down how, if you just have people right, when you're trying to roll out this change and you just have them learn something and then take a test to prove that they learned it, sure, that's kind of helpful. But if you can build in situations where they then get to, in a sandbox setting, try to go through and use them, that's so much more effective. And I think, to my own experience in grad school, because I started grad school from a total career change in my mid-30s, and there were so many people in that data analytics program that had come to data analytics by just being good at their job, and then one day there was a need that they needed someone to kind of work with the reports, and then that person just kind of started getting drawn more into the technical side of that job, and then they realized, oh, this is actually really cool. I don't have to be a mathematician to do data analysts. And then they saw the huge growth potential, and then they came and got a master's degree because they wanted to move up at their company in the department they were at, but they wanted to really have more of the formal background. And I think if you're at a place that has such good change management and such a permeation of data-driven culture, I think it lowers that barrier of people who think they can't do data analysts, or that's outside of their skill set, to be oh, this is actually really cool. And if you could have that employee retention and giving that growth path, and having someone who is a subject matter expert to also be in your, that's the dream. And I think having more of those hands-on learning tools also really helps do that retention and find those hidden gems that are already committed to your company and the work that you guys do. But that was my initial reaction. So if anyone else would like to kind of have any additional thoughts on that, please chime in.
Yeah, just a real quick response to that, Renee. I know, Renee and I actually have worked on, just within our own organization, more exposure, right? So that's just making things not only tools, but just Renee started an Excel Tip Tuesday, and that's shared with the organization. And we're starting to see a lot of response to this, and people understanding that some of this, even some of the data model builds and building of dashboards and graphs and charts and metrics is something very attainable, and not something that's this kind of misnomer that it's so far off, or it's only for data scientists, or it's even only for our data specialists within our organizations. So just even exposing organizations to things that can get them more hands-on is going to start really showing, to your point, Renee, that oh, I guess I am a data analyst, or I can be, right? So
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
a great point.
I think as you continue to get that buy-in, right, of individuals being able to access those data first via, Andy, I love like the point, and Renee, I think actually brought it up to like the sandbox environment, being able to explore somewhere where you don't feel, I'm going to mess this up, right? And being able to do that in a safe environment where maybe you have a really guided activity. So in a sandbox, and maybe here's your role, here's your guided activity on how you would access these data every single day or within your career, within your pathway. So you can do that and see the results of those data. But once you also become fluent with that, I think either Andy or Mike, you mentioned this earlier, or before you're fluent with that, having your leader also support you with walking through that. It's a goal to do that. It's a team effort that we're doing as an organization. And then again, I can't remember who mentioned this earlier, but then beyond that, then bringing it into the folds of the individual user of, what other things could I use to be more successful in my role? So not only are we shifting to just using data, but then we're also shifting the mindset of, I have these other decisions that I'd like to make, and I actually can use data to do this. And so now how do I become a data scientist myself and be able to find those data and or get the support in order to access those to make my job easier? Because in the end, ultimately, if we have access to really great data, to the point of, Andy, with your client earlier, it actually will make your job a lot easier in the end, and automate a lot of the things that get us out of the Google sheet that Mike was talking about, and really being able to streamline so much of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yep. Kaja, I think your point of shifting perspectives is really interesting to me, because I think becoming a data-driven organization is a perspective shift. And one of the key shifts that I see is moving from using analytics to tell you what did happen to using analytics to say what will happen, and then to take it a step further, what's the next best action now that I know what will happen? And once you have that flow and can repeat that, you can build automated systems that then are making those decisions for you. And at that point that you've developed that workflow, you have this unique competitive advantage in your space to really go above and beyond your competitors.
Mike, I feel like we should pay you because that was the perfect layup. I'm gonna like hit it off the backboard hopefully, but I'm gonna shoot it over to Shaylin or Kaja, really. But I feel like we're talking about, right, all this work that needs to do to try to help make this shift happen. But could one of our change managers here talk more about how do you shift that cultural mindset away from seeing data, like Andy said in the beginning, as like an add-on? Like, I guess it's something we should be doing. It's 2023, we should have data, to having like an organization see this is a core function to our business. Like, this is a pillar of who we are and the other good work we do regardless of industry. So how do you like see that mindset shift within an organization that data is integral to this?
I can take a stab first, and then Kaja, I'm super interested to hear what you have to say. I think this harkens back to some of my earlier points, where it does kind of start at the top in the business strategy. So if we are aligning our business strategy to measurable outcomes, and then using data to point to the activities or the methodologies that we use to move the needle of the organization, that's really how we're going to button all of this up. And show the what's in it for me across all levels of the employee, but also across all functions and leaders as well.
Yeah, I'd agree, Shaylin. We kind of hit the nail on the head of what I was going to say. Is ultimately, as an organization, we have to know what are our goals, right? What are our business goals? And that could be a variety of goals, right? That could be our financial goals. That could be our cultural goals that are measured on, a team member survey, things along those lines, or client outcomes. Right? There are so many different goals within an organization we can look at, but in order to know if you're meeting those goals, you have to have some sort of data metrics to get there. And so starting there, looking at the ultimate outcomes, but also you can shift and support each role to know, how do my behaviors support that outcome there? And so you can even shift it down another level of, what are the data that I need in my role to be successful, to then shift this outcome, whether it's a financial metric, a client success metric, a team member satisfaction metric, a turnover in our IT tickets timeliness metric, whatever that might be that we've determined. But that starts with knowing as an organization what your goals are, and then being able to look at the either department or individual scale of, then what are the behaviors that drive data to then result for the business change.
Gosh, I also think about how, right, because we're talking like, it really does need to come from leadership, but unfortunately, not all of us are the CEO of the place where we work at, unfortunately. That I think you can even like take that gut check of like, what am I the leader of within whatever role or organization I'm in? And I'm thinking even on a managerial level, like when I've been like an entry level employee, when I've had reviews and my boss can point to like metrics and specifics of like, hey, here's why I'm giving you this review, or like, here's where I want to see you grow because I saw you hop on Slack and help 3 people. Like last month alone, I saw you step up and do these things. Like that's even in a small microcosm where you can be like, even if you're just a people manager, and I don't say just a people manager because it really is like an amazingly hard job and very important, but like, you know, if you can think of ways that you can incorporate data and then show people that you are using that to like then support the feedback you're giving, I think is really important. But yeah, having it come from the top is really valuable. Any other thoughts on kind of implementing that throughout the organization? Okay, well,
Sorry,
please, no, please.
I think to your point, Renee, though, it can be challenging. And I think if you don't have leaders maybe that have the background in data, and I think someone mentioned it earlier that, maybe there's the old school mentality of this is the way we've always done that. But no matter your role, to your point, Renee, is you can use data-based decisions within every aspect of your practice. And sometimes the way that we initiate change within an organization and even change our leadership's perspective is by doing those on our own and by using the data that we have at hand to show that we can implement significant change. But I'd encourage anyone that maybe isn't in a CEO level role, maybe is having some of those challenges, to look at what are our business goals, because you're going to have business goals within an organization, one way or another. And kind of what I mentioned earlier is, if you really want to focus on those data-based decisions and get the buy-in from your leadership, start doing it on your level to then see how that aligns to those business goals and model how doing that can support change. And you can actually either implement things faster or more successfully, or adoption quicker or higher, return on investment by using some little shifts here with some data adoption just within your own personal behavior or within the behavior of your own department.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I fully agree. Mike, I'm going to have you close us out with our last formal question, but I see we've got a couple in the Q&A, so please keep them coming. But yeah, Mike, could you close us out by just telling me a little bit more about your own experience with organizations and how they have implemented like a more data-driven approach or practice into decision making?
Absolutely. So I'll go back to the ed tech company that we worked at together. And, they were a company that were working off Excel spreadsheets where they would get information from institutions that we would work with on matriculation dates for students, grades, and things like that. And that spreadsheet might come in on a weekly basis over email. And what we moved to was a process where we're actually integrating with the systems at the institutions and pulling that data over now in a data feed, and we were presenting it to the coaches. So they had more data, it was more real time, but there was still this black box. The way we did that was through custom Python scripts, and it was black magic to like everyone who used it on a day-to-day basis. You didn't know what the source data looked like. You didn't know how it was transformed. So what we had done was we actually took a step back and re-architected the process and went with a low code solution called SnapLogic. SnapLogic is like this visual coding for data integrations, and it added this layer of transparency to the data, what was happening to it, how it came in, how it was transformed, and we were able to give that transparency directly to the people that were using the data. So they had more faith in the data, they understood how it was being sourced, and the results that we saw from that were like almost double the confidence in some surveys we did of the confidence in the data, because they knew what was happening, they knew where it was coming from, and there's no more black box to it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really huge. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mike. And we've got about 8 minutes left, and we do have some questions in our Q&A. So I'm going to turn this over to the rest of the panel. But our first question comes from Matthew Allen, and he's asking us, in previous roles, I run into pushback against data-informed decisions. Either management wouldn't believe results, or they would just round file results that weren't liked or understood. So the question is, do you have any specific strategies, tactics, or arguments to help individuals trust or absorb data in a one-on-one or small meeting setting?
Yeah, I can take that one, Renee. So one of the techniques that I've seen work really well is, well, let me start with actually a course that we've designed and I've delivered in multiple organizations was around translating information to insights, right? So there's data dashboards and data outputs will produce good observations. And one of the challenges I've often seen is the misinterpretation or the lack of diligence in following on those, right? So creating the additional fact pattern, which oftentimes takes some manual effort to do that, right? So really making sure that what we're seeing in that data not only is accurate, but more importantly is that we're really thinking about what are the root causes of that? What are some of the other fact patterns that we can pull in to actually help translate that from an observation to an actual insight, and then having that discussion. So it's not just, hey, I see this on a dashboard, let's take action on this, which again is probably to Matthew's point, oftentimes what I've seen is where people are not fully understanding the drivers of what they're seeing, or we're not able to present it in a way that has kind of the additional fact patterns and that diligence behind it.
Yeah, that tracks. Anyone else have any other recommendations when you're like in a meeting and someone is just being like, that information isn't happening. That's not an accurate measurement. I feel like in my experience, it's usually a situation where it's like, I want to already have the records or files to back it up if it's something I'm going to bring up for the first time. Or sometimes I feel like almost this is like a change management where it's like, who else do I need to socialize? Like, how do I get another data champion with me when I say this? Like, if there's a known stakeholder who's like, that department's not having that problem, and you're like, everyone in this department knows we're having this problem, then like, how do I either like bring the tracking and results of like, so I don't even have to say there's problems. I'm like, hey, it looks like 30% of people couldn't access the system they needed, or we are 25% behind where we need it to be. And then having someone else who I've already like socialized that information with, you can be like, yeah, from my experience, that is indeed happening. I think that might be one approach that I've seen in some of the work that I've done. We have one other question. It's a little more technical, so this might be for Mike or Andy here. But again, we still got a couple minutes, so feel free to throw anything else in the Q&A section. But it starts off by saying, in the past years, I've noticed that the title data scientist has evolved. In some cases, it seems to encompass everything that just isn't dashboarding. So the way that we're using, and I say we isn't like us right now, accidental data scientist kind of builds on that. So the question is, could you comment on how to support a closed loop between the extreme technical side, models, operationalization, and the newer accidental side, so that everyone can get what they need in order to help others get what they need? So basically, like, how do you reconcile the fact that you have like super high technical people, and then maybe we do have some more like just business me's that are like really working with tech people, but like aren't necessarily tech themselves, like in order to make sure that everyone's getting the information they need from both sides.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. And when we're saying accidental data scientist, I'm talking about a user that is using a tool and they're like, hey, you know what? I've noticed a pattern in here. I've looked at this data. I've noticed a pattern. It seems important to me. But you know, the extreme technical side is going to say, you know what? I need a model to prove that. And that's what we kind of do is we work to connect the people that think they found a trend or found something impactful for the organization and connect them with the data scientists that can use that information and prove it. They can build a model and say, is this true? Is this something that we're going to make business decisions off of? Now, you can't do that with every single time somebody's like, hey, I have an idea.
Sure.
But what you can do is go through like a traditional product management approach. There's feedback. I want this feature. I think this is a thing that's important to me. And we look at our recommendations, we prioritize them, and the things that are most impactful to the business, some of the things that are the lower effort, are surfaced to the top very quickly and treated like a product. And we will dedicate developers time to focusing on that and figuring out, is this something that we want to implement as an organization? So, you know, in summary, it's treating data like a product with traditional product management approaches.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there. I feel like something that has come up tangentially in a lot of these conversations today is the idea of having translation between the business and the technical, like the non-technical and the technical. I was wondering, just as we close out today, Shaylin, or if anyone has any final comments or best practices for like how you help support that technical to non-technical translation. How do you make sure business is communicating to tech what they need and tech is understanding what business needs are, or communicating back out to them what they're actually doing?
It's a really good question, Renee. And I think it's always kind of a balance and meeting the organization where they're at, to steal Michael's phrase.
Yeah.
It takes a good combo of being able to understand the technical while then also being able to put it into layman's terms, and then just making sure that we're checking back with each other, that we're all picking up what we're putting down and everyone's saying the same thing, and not being afraid to ask clarifying questions, I think is going to be a key to success. There's no such thing as a dumb question, to end us on another cliche.
Yes, no, I love it. I think that's exactly what it is. I think it's that like eliminating that fear of failure, that like there is no wrong way to have this conversation and to make sure that we're aligned. And I think between having that data-driven approach from top down, having a lot of clear communication, making sure that people understand the end users and the needs, the end users understand why maybe they have to check more boxes. Like as long as people are all aligned and informed on what's happening, I think those are real catalyst to delivering that data-driven culture within any organization. So I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us today. That's pretty much been our hour. So if you have any follow-up questions, or if you'd like to connect with us, feel free to find Propeller on LinkedIn. We'll have all of our panelists' information on that webinar invite. So I just want to thank you so much, Mike and Kaja, for joining us today, and Shaylin and Andy for lending us your expertise. And it's just been my pleasure to moderate all of you for today. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your evening, everyone.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.